Hi everyone, my name is Paul, your favorite car guy, and today I'm going to be talking about how to perform a proper brake job on a 2004 Subaru Impreza RS 4-door with a 2.5 liter engine non-turbo. Aren't you excited? I mean, come on, this is going to be great. Yeah, I know there's a ton of videos out there on YouTube that talk about how to perform this brake job, but they're just really a nuts and bolts. Hey, here's how you put the rotor on, here's how you take it off. They don't go into much detail beyond that and really telling you what you need to do the job properly. And that's because, well, I think a lot of guys just don't know. Now, I have a lot of experience as an automotive service technician. I was certified for over a decade, ASC Master Certified. I went to school for it, all that stuff. So I'm going to pass along this information to you so that you can do the proper brake job on your car without having to spend tons of money to get it done. Because let's face it, if you're going to do the brake job yourself, you're going to cut your cost in half right there. So you might as well spend your money right so that you get the most out of this brake job that you're going to be performing. And that's really important. I mean, let's face it. There's multiple systems on the car. There's fuel system, there's electrical system. But the brake system is the most important of all. I mean, you can live with some of the other systems failing on you while you're driving. But if the brake system fails, you got major problems, man. You don't want that. So let's focus on doing things the right way this time, and then you don't have to worry about those things so much, and that's a good thing. All right, so how do we do that? Well, part of that comes from the selection of the parts, okay? Now, what I like to do is, one of the things, I like AutoZone, okay? I like AutoZone for their prices and the quality of the products. Now, I'm not going to say everything they have is of the utmost quality. It's just fantastic stuff, but they're pretty strong on price. And the quality of the parts, especially in the brake area, is really quite good. So you're going to have 3 different types of brake pads to choose from. Types, okay? So when you get there and they look up the brake pads for you, you're going to say, whoa, man, there's like 6 different types of pads I can buy. What am I supposed to get? And what you're going to be looking for is the semi-metallic pads and the ceramic pads. There's also an organic pad that's made, but you don't want organic, okay? Organic, they won't last very long, and they are the cheapest ones, but for 19 bucks, what good does that do you if you have to keep replacing them every few months? Let's buy a brake pad that's going to last, and it's going to hold up much better to the higher temperatures. Hey, if you live in the hill ranges, like if you live in Kentucky, if you live up in Pittsburgh, you don't want to be driving around on organic brake pads, okay? Nobody should be using those. I think they make them out of tree bark and cucumbers or something. I don't know. Whatever they make them out of, you don't want them, okay? So step up into, at least, if you're cost conscious and your budget is just crazy tight, okay, get a semi-metallic brake pad then. If you can make the swing from $29 to $39 to get a ceramic pad, I would recommend the ceramic pads to you. Now, the benefit of the ceramic is there's less dust. Hey, if you got a nice set of rims on your car, you don't want semi-metallics, okay? Go with the ceramics. They're going to work much better for you. They don't leave as much dust. On top of that, they wear longer. They also have a broader operating temperature range. What does that mean? Well, brake pads have a rating. They operate best within a certain temperature range, meaning when they're stone cold, when you first step on them, they don't grip quite as well. And then as they start to heat up, they really start to come on. And as they get hotter and hotter and hotter, they perform well to a point. And then when they get too hot, they kind of tip off the end, and then they don't perform very well again. Ceramics are great because they can handle the higher heats, and they'll recover much more quickly. So if you live in the hilly ranges, you know, in the country, I would definitely be wanting to go down the streets of San Francisco with ceramic pads instead of the semi-metallics, although the semi-metallics are okay. They're okay. All right, so let's talk about brake rotors. Look, you're going to have to replace your brake rotors whenever you do a brake job. Don't try to keep the old rotors. It's a bad idea. For one thing, brake rotors aren't what they were years ago, where we used to machine them, put a fresh friction surface on them, and put on the new pads, and we were good to go. They don't make brake rotors thick enough anymore. They make them too thin, so we can't machine them anymore, at least not on passenger cars. So if you have that kind of a deal, if you have a passenger car, you're going to be replacing the rotors automatically. Don't try to reuse them. Without a fresh friction surface for the pads to mate up to, it'll greatly accelerate the wear of the pad, and the pad will never quite grip properly. So you don't want that. All right. Again, I'm talking about cutting your cost in half by doing it this way, okay? So you're going to be getting a semi-metallic premium brake pad, or the next step up, about $45 for a set of ceramics, okay? And I put ceramics on all of my cars. I just think it's the way to go. And then I'm going to buy, between the two brake rotors, there's a premium, which is usually a 2-year warranty, and then there's a 1-year warranty. Look, I always buy the cheaper rotor because it's going to be just fine. And I'm going to be replacing it whenever I put new pads in, right? So why do I need a 2-year? I don't know. You can go with a 2-year warranty and try to work the warranty out and see if you can get new ones. I don't know. I just don't mess with it myself. I just get the cheaper rotor, and that minimizes my cost on my brake job for that car. I don't know how long I'm going to have the car. Maybe I'll only have it a year and I'm going to get rid of it anyway. I don't know. So anyway, that's the way I do it. Okay, so let's go on to the nuts and bolts of doing the brake job. Okay, first of all, you're going to bring your brake rotors home, and you're going to find out that when you pull them out of the box, they're in a plastic bag. And the reason for that is they try to keep moisture off them so they don't rust. And one of the things they do is they'll coat it with like an oily coating. There's like a dip that they put it in, and you got to wash that stuff off because you don't want your brake pads mating in with this oil that's on the brake rotors already. It'll create burn marks. It's not a good scene. So you're going to clean that off. Get yourself a can of brake clean while you're at the parts store, and some paper towels. They have these thick blue paper towels that work really well. And I'll show you in the video how you hose them off and you wipe them down. And it's really easy to do. You just want to remember that step. That's all. So I've got a lot of different videos and clips here to talk to you about. Let's dive right in and get started on this brake job. One of the things I look for is a leaking master cylinder. And you can detect that by looking at below this brake booster. That's the black large canister that you see that's behind the master cylinder. You look down below, you can see how there's been some leakage there, and it's actually melted away the paint and it's begun to rust. Now it's not wet there, and what that tells me is most likely it was wet at one time and it's not any longer. This cylinder's probably been replaced, and so chances are that there's nothing wrong with that cylinder. But when they are leaking, when they are bad, you'll see that kind of wet and grimy down there. So the first step is, after you get the car up, is to turn the steering wheel so you can get to the caliper. And before I loosen any bolts, the first thing I do is I go in here with a screwdriver, and I'll find the gap that exists between, or I'll make a gap if I have to, between the rotor and the pad. And I'll get in there and pry on that, and I'm pushing the pad back into the caliper. That will press the piston back in, so that when it comes time to load the new pads, the pistons are already retracted. And you're going to tear up the pad, but that's okay because you're not going to be using that pad again. Now, usually I'll use a pry bar for this, but I can't get a pry bar in there. The vents on the caliper just aren't large enough for that. So I'm just going to push it back this way until it feels like I can't push back any further. And that should be about it. Alright, so now I'm at a place where I can go ahead and take the caliper off. They're held on by these two 14mm bolts. So I'll spin those out. That'll release the caliper, and then it's onto the bracket. The next step is you're going to want to inspect these brake hoses real good. And what you're looking for is cracks in the rubber, and especially any leakage. So you would see dark, something greasy around there. This particular one continues on up all the way to here on the hard line. So you just want to inspect that real good. If you do see some leakage, you're going to have to replace this line.
So go ahead and remove the two bolts that hold the caliper in place, and with those out, which I already pointed to earlier, the caliper will slide right up and off of the pads and rotor assembly. And as you can see here, I have it resting on the control arm in the back. You're going to want to do something like that. You can put it on the control arm, you can put it on the box of brake pads that you bought. Whatever you want to do, just don't let it hang unsupported on the brake hose. That's bad for brake hoses.
Okay, so I slipped the caliper off. It was very easy. Here's the pads. And so these will come off real easy. And then the you can see below there are these are the clips that hold the pads in place. And we're probably going to reuse those unless they're supplied in your brake pad kit. So the next thing is to pull the bracket off. There's 2 bolts here that need to come off, and that will slide the bracket out of the way so you can get the rotor off. Okay, for my next amazing feat, I'm going to show you how to dismount the brake caliper bracket, which is very difficult to show you when it's on the car, so I have it off the car for you to see. As you can see, this is my kung fu. I'm going to show you how to do this, okay? Pay attention now. So we have the brake rotor is right in this location. The caliper mounts here, and I showed you how to take off those pins. Behind that are 2 14mm headed bolts that hold the caliper to the steering knuckle. And this has to come off in order to remove said brake rotor. How are you going to do that? I like to use a combination wrench. This is what a combination wrench looks like. And it is 14mm. It's not 9/16, and it's not 5/8. It's 14mm, and that's what you're going to want to use for this so you don't round off the heads. Now, one of the tricks that I use, this is my kung fu I was talking about, okay? Pay attention now. As I'll put this on the head of the bolt, and then I'll smack this with a rubber mallet. So I'm holding it onto the head of the bolt with my finger, and with my other finger, I'm going to take some of the slop out, give it some tension, so when I hit it with the mallet, it's going to knock it up and around. Now remember, the fasteners always need to turn counterclockwise to get them off and clockwise to get them on. And by holding them on there like that, and then striking them with the hammer, that blow will knock it free, and it's a lot less of a knuckle buster project. It becomes a little bit more of a civilized project for you to engage in. Yeah, you're going to want to do that. So I've got maybe 4 or 5 good heavy blows on the surface of the disc with the big hammer there, and she comes right off. Next, I'll take my clean brake rotor here and just set it up on the hub. And then we'll reverse the procedure. We'll take the bracket, and I'm going to clean these up real good, and then we'll move on to installing that one. Now this next step is the one that, if you forget about it or if you don't do it, is where you get yourself into trouble, and it'll decrease the brake life. So you see these 2 pieces here. These are what the caliper floats on. You see how it's nice and loose right there? But this one is bound up. And so what that means is the caliper won't be able to float in there the way it's supposed to, and then it'll excessively wear one of the pads and not the other, which will ruin the rotor, and you'll end up having to do another brake job on this corner, or at least even on the front whole axle, because you haven't gone through and made sure these sliders were lubricated. So I need to pull this apart. I'll pull this one out too, clean them, lubricate them, put them back together, and then they'll work properly. Alright, so to pull these out, all you do is you just pull back on the boot, and they'll slide right out. This one I'll have to get a wrench or something to get a hold of that, and pull that one out and do just the same. And I'll wipe them down real good, and put a little bit of bearing grease on it, and put them back in, make sure the rubber cup seals back up, and that'll be fine. Then it'll work properly. Okay, so once you're ready to put your slide pins in and so forth, I went ahead and got this new hardware, and it does make it a little bit easier to show you what I'm going to be doing with. So here's the new bracket. You likely won't need to have this, but you simply use a little bit of axle grease, you lubricate your pin, and you'll install your boot. And it's really important that you get this to sort of lock in there. So you just kind of twist that around and squeeze and push on it, and then that will lock in to this part of it. And then there's also a shoulder that's on the pin here, and you're going to make sure you lock into that as well. So what I've done is I put a little dab of grease on it and then slid the boot up onto the pin, and it slid up very easily, just a little bit of twisting. And now I'm going to add some grease, make sure I get it into the bore, slide it down, twist, push, and that will lock that in place. And these pins are they're slightly different from one to another, as you can see here. So you just don't want to get them mixed up as you do these. This longer one is going to go up on this side, and the shorter is going to go on this side. I'm going to go ahead and lubricate this. Get a fair amount in there so that gets in that bore. I don't want this stuff getting all over the calipers, so I'm not going to go crazy. I just need enough in there to keep it lubricated. And there, it's in. That's the kind of movement that we want. So I'll just do the same with the other side, and then this will be all set, ready to go on. The remaining hardware that needs to be put on are for the brake pads, and this allows the brake pads to slide, and it shims them up properly. These are very easy to install. So all I do is just look down here to make sure that they're snapping on properly. That's really all there is to it. So next what you've done is we place the rotor on the hub, and then we mount the bracket in place and prepare to install the pads and the calipers. And as for the rears, what you see is essentially the same design. You've got a caliper here. You've got the two bolts that hold it in. You can compress your piston or pistons. In this case, there's two. And then the bracket can be unbolted from the top and the bottom, and then removed so that the drum rotor combination can be removed and replaced.
Now, once again, you'll wrap on the face of the brake rotor with your heavy hammer in order to loosen that up so that you can slide it off of there. Now, these rotors also have tapped holes. You'll notice in the face of the brake rotor, in the area where it slides around the center section, around the studs. Those threaded holes are there so you can insert a bolt and run it in, and it'll push against the hub, the nut, and then drive the brake rotor away from the hub. Now, this is a preferred method as opposed to using a slammer to loosen it up. So if you're having trouble with it, if you find yourself having to hit it harder than you really should, you better resort to plan B and look for a bolt that fits that thread that you can run in, and that'll pop it loose for you. Because remember, when you're slamming on the rotor, what you're really doing is putting a lot of shock into the bearing, and that's not good. Now, the 2004 and 2005, the Subaru Imprezas, they use this rear parking brake assembly is a drum style brake. So the brake rotors on the rear are a little bit taller and a little bit wider around the center section to accommodate the drum portion of the brakes inside of the rotor. And then pictured here, you can see the parking brake assembly. Now the pad material there is going to be very thin, and that's because you're not stopping with it. It's just for parking brake. So you should not need to do anything with that. Simply install the new rotor and you should be good to go.
Now these caliper designs that have a better window, you can go in there and you may have trouble getting between the rotor and the pad, but you can get between the rotor that sticks up higher in the caliper and then pull back, and that will do the same thing essentially. You're prying against the rotor and the caliper, and that will push that piston inward so you can get a screwdriver in deeper against the pad, or between the pad and the rotor. So when you get your rear brake pads out, you're going to find that they have two of these little clips. Now these clips are used, those are brake sensors, and they're designed to warn you when the brake material is very low. And you'll notice too on the pads there's these 2 indentations. So you can clip this on to inside that indentation there, and then mount the pad, and then as the brake material wears, eventually this little piece of metal will touch the brake rotor and it'll make noise. Now I recommend that you mount this clip to the outboard pad. That's just the way most brake systems are set up. They'll have one sensor on the outboard pad for each wheel, and usually if you set them up that way, you'll have no problems with clearance once you finish putting everything together.
And so here pictured we have everything assembled as it was. Now remember, when you do this brake job, before you drive off in this car, you're going to want to pump the brakes several times, because the pistons are pushed all the way back in the bore, and when you press down on the brake pedal, they only move a little bit, just a fraction of an inch. So you're going to have to push the brakes several times in order to get the pistons all the way out, so that when you step on the brakes, the car will stop and you won't end up in your neighbor's front yard.
Okay folks, just 2 more things I want to bring up for you before we close, okay? We're almost done. First, if someone has topped off the brake fluid since the level had dropped as the pads wore, when you compress the pistons back into the calipers, that's going to push that fluid back up, and you're going to have a situation where it might spill out over the cap. AutoZone does sell this turkey baster looking tool that you can use to suck some of that fluid out of there, so to keep that from happening. It just stops things from becoming a mess, that's all. Not a bad idea to do that. The other thing is, once you're done, you've got your lug nuts are tightened down and you're ready to start driving your car, you pump the brakes several times once you get the car running to make sure the pistons are all the way out. And now it's time to burnish the brakes. That's right, it's called burnishing. All it really means is you're going to seat the brakes. And the way it's done, there's a rule of thumb for it, and I'll explain. You take the car out and drive it, you take it up to 30 miles per hour, and you stamp on the brakes, very firm, almost locking up the tires. Almost to a stop position, and then you accelerate away and you do it again. And you're going to do this about 5 times. The idea is to get the brakes very warm, good and hot, but not overheat them. And this helps to seat the brakes. In fact, when you get out of the car when you're done, you'll notice quite a smell as the adhesives are working inside the brake pad. So this is a necessary step to making sure that everything is set properly the way that the manufacturer wants you to do it. So what you're going to find out too is, now the brakes won't be quite as grippy as you're used to, but over the course of the next couple of days, if you're driving the car, it will improve dramatically, and you'll notice it'll be just as good as you ever remember it having been. So that's it. That's our video, and I just got a phone call from my daughter yesterday. It turns out now the exhaust broke in half in front of the catalytic converter. So we got more work to do, folks, and you'd be crazy not to subscribe and come back and like this video. So make sure you do that. We're going to find out what it's like to replace the exhaust on this thing too. So see you later.